We are live on Proline TV, the Our Lads Football Network. I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in for another off-season interview in the NFL as we talk about the Atlanta Falcons. And that means Kevin Knight, Falcoholic.com, joining us, as always, to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. How's it going, Kevin?
Good. We were talking before the show how the fan enthusiasm since the Atlanta Falcons' very spicy first round, which was, 2 years in a row now. The Falcons talked about a lot after day one of the NFL draft. It seems like maybe the first one seems to have worked out okay for them, so maybe this one will work out too. But definitely a lot of excitement around the team. So happy to talk about them at this point.
Yes, we all know what that conversation was like last year. Hey, look, we found out they had a plan, and they smartly made the move. And so there's a lot of excitement. I know a lot of the national media will be looking at the Falcons as one of those sexy little sleeper picks. Matter of fact, I really believe now the way the South is, and this has not been very good the last several years. Tampa Bay's been winning, and even though they've been winning, it's not like they've been dominating. But now there are three teams in the NFC South, and I'm going to include, I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs this year, but I really like what's going on in Carolina now. And they're coming up. And as long as Bryce Young develops, and it looks like Penix is also hopefully on that move to develop, this is going to be a very competitive division.
Yeah, I think so too, and except for the Saints, which I'm,
except for the Saints,
you can tell how broken up I am about the Saints' misfortune. But the Bucks have the Bucks are a fun team. Like, I don't want to act like I dislike the Bucks. Like, because the NFC South, most of these NFC South teams are sort of like brotherly. The Panthers and the Falcons and the Bucks are all kind of like, oh, you guys, we're rival. Everybody just hates the Saints, so it's kind of like, I don't hate the Bucks or the Panthers the same way, but the Bucks, I think, really have just taken advantage of the Falcons falling on their face at late in the season over and over and over again. The Falcons swept them last year. Now, one of those games could definitely have gone either way, no lie here, but still, and the Falcons still lost. They still blew it, thanks to Kirk Cousins allegedly hiding an injury from the team. I still don't know what to believe about that, but the Panthers, I feel like the Panthers are just like a year or two behind the Falcons timeline, but I like the moves they made. I'm kind of surprised that they ended up going with Ted at the top. I think, I thought they were going to go with the guy the Falcons ended up taking with Jalen Walker. That seemed to be the buzz going in, and Falcons benefit there. I wasn't the biggest Jalen Walker fan in terms of a top 10 pick, but you start getting into the teens and the 20s and it makes a lot more sense to me. So, I think they're definitely a team to watch, and, much like Atlanta, it's all about the quarterback. So, can the Bucks do it again with a third offensive coordinator? Sooner or later, you got to feel like they're going to miss on one, right? Hopefully, that's what I keep telling myself. We'll see how that goes. But the division is looking a lot more interesting than it looked even, 6-7 months ago. So that's good for the NFL as a whole.
It is. And it's good for the division. It started, as far as the offseason, for Atlanta to try to catch up to Tampa Bay with the signing, the free agent deals, and so forth. But it wasn't a big offseason at that point because they just didn't have anywhere near the cash that they had in the previous offseason. And so, but what they did do is they started the process of building up their edge, and their big offseason addition was Leonard Floyd. And of course, we'll talk about how the draft followed that up. But talk about Leonard Floyd, and what do you think he's going to do? Do you think he's a 1 year kind of hire? You think he'll be here for a few years? What do you think about Leonard Floyd?
Yeah, I think, Leonard Floyd is going into his age 33 season. So I think the Falcons, Leonard Floyd has been one of the most consistent 8+ sack players in the NFL over like the past 5 years. So I think what the Falcons were looking for was they've had luck doing this in the past, particularly under Dan Quinn, where, they brought in Dwight Freeney right after they'd taken Vic Beasley because they really wanted to bring in someone that could help sort of teach the rooks, and the young players how to do it at a high level. Someone who's been there, done that. They brought in Calais Campbell, a couple of years ago. That was a great signing for them. I think they really like having a proven veteran presence in the room to help kind of mold the young players and give them someone to look up to. Because after they moved on from Matt Judon, or just let him walk essentially, because that didn't end up working out for various reasons, but still thought it was a good idea. I mean, I think there's a lot of revisionist history going on with regards to that move, where people are like, "Oh, that was dumb." You didn't think it was dumb at the time. I don't think anyone did. They had to take a swing. They missed. It happens. But I think Floyd, honestly, like I think they this is kind of their overall strategy, and we'll get into it with the other guys they signed, but they want someone there. They need a guy that can be a starter, but they don't necessarily want him to be. Like, I think Floyd, they want to be their pass rush ace, their guy that they bring in on third down. And that's kind of it. They don't really want to have to. I mean, Floyd is a fine early down player. He's not great. He's a smaller pass rush specialist. I think they would love to have Floyd as like a designated pass rusher that they can just bring in high leverage situations. Because he's a great finisher, and that's kind of what they lacked last year. Judon didn't end up being the finisher that they needed. They do have some pressure players, and their actual pressure rate is nowhere near as bad as their sack rate has been. But Floyd's a great finisher. I think he gives them I think he's probably a guy you want playing, like, not a ton of snaps overall, maybe 30 to 40%. But basically being one of your key pass rushers. And I think that's what he's going to be for them. And they're not, for the first time in forever, they're not going to be just depending on a 33-year-old edge rusher to come in and play like 70% of the snaps and think that that's going to produce great results. I think Floyd, in his 33 season as a designated pass rusher, you're much more likely to get high leverage play from him if you let him play the role that he's best at, and don't use up all of his energy playing the run. It's just it's not worth it. But 10 million's a lot for that type of player, but they didn't know that. I mean, they weren't expecting obviously to get 2 first round edge rushers going into the draft. So I think they kind of had to get at least someone in the door, because we've seen it. Like, Arnold Ebiketie is a perfectly good complementary rusher, but he can't be number one, and he also just can't do it by himself. And that's basically what he's had to do his entire career. So getting Floyd in the door to kind of be that other guy that you at least have him is good business. And I think that's ultimately, Floyd as maybe the third pass rusher that's a pass rush specialist, I think will be very good for them if they can actually limit his role to that. If he has to play a bunch more because of injuries, you probably see the efficiency drop down.
Yeah, because you're speaking of Ebiketie, it was back there in 2022. They drafted him. They drafted him alone, and it was hope that, okay, they weren't first-round guys. Maybe they'll develop. Well, they haven't really developed as planned. So they go ahead and they add Trice in last year, but that was like a red shirt. The good news is then after what happened in the draft, now there's a lot more depth talent-wise that you just never know. At least you've got guys, 5th, 6th back there that, hey, maybe they can come out. They're still young enough that maybe they develop. There's a lot more hope than they've had in a few years. But overall, as far as free agency was concerned, the main guys besides Floyd that they did pick up were all on defense. Even though Floyd was the top get, they did also add Jordan Fuller, Morgan Fox, and a couple other players. So what did you think? If someone outside of Floyd, who do you think is going to contribute the most? Who do you think you're looking forward to seeing be a part of the defense here as far as the free agents?
Yeah, I mean, I think Divine Diablo is kind of the wild card here. They signed him to an $8 million. I think it was roughly $8 million per year. It was a 2-year deal. And, he's a converted safety. And really what happened last year was when Anderson missed time, which unfortunately has become kind of a thing with him, they didn't have athleticism in the linebacking core. Caden Ellis is a former edge rusher who's very good at what he does. He's a great blitzer. He could play the run. He could play zone pretty decently, but he's not an athlete at that spot. He's a big linebacker. And without Troy Anderson, they just didn't have athleticism back there. So Diablo, converted safety, who's played off ball the last couple of years, he has the athleticism. He's someone that they're going to be depending on to kind of be their coverage backer, I think. And, I think we're all still hoping that Troy Anderson can stay healthy because, unfortunately, when he got hurt, he was coming off his best game that he'd ever played. I think he had a pick six. He had like 17 tackles and like, and then he gets hurt on special teams in the fourth quarter. It's like, wow, great job, guys. They had to try to get him 18 tackles on special teams, but yeah, it didn't work out. So Diablo, I think, is someone that is likely to start. That would be my guess, over Troy Anderson, but
okay.
I still have a soft spot for Troy. I hope that he's able to get it together this year and what is a contract year essentially, or close to it. And this is sort of his last chance. So we'll see who
is he healthy right now. Will he be healthy?
Yes, he did. He was able to come back at the end of the season. They didn't really, especially like when they were kind of out of it the last week, they didn't really rush him back as much as they could have. But yeah, he should be healthy at this point. So that'll be an interesting spot. You mentioned Morgan Fox. I think he's going to be another one of those guys they brought in to boost their third down pass, focused defense with a guy that's a really reliable veteran pass rusher. Again, not someone you want playing early downs, but good player, consistent production. You lose Grady Jarrett, which is obviously painful for me. Like, I have a Jarrett jersey. He's been kind of the quintessential Falcon, but Jarrett was making like $23 million and performing like an above, like a roughly average to above average starter when he's getting elite money. And he signed with the Bears for close to elite money. So, it was hard to say goodbye, but they didn't have the money to risk on that. And we'll see if Onyemata sticks around after June 1st. That's another one that could, they could save another $10 million if they move on from him. So, but they have to do it after June 1st because they restructured his contract. So they actually can't designate him post June 1st. So we'll see if they decide to keep him too. But, Morgan Fox, I think, is a necessary veteran guy that's going to come in and provide some pass rush juice. Jordan Fuller, before they drafted Xavier Watts, was kind of penciled in to be the strong safety. And with Xavier Watts in here, seems like he's going to be the third safety, which I think is actually a really good fit for him. And DeMarco Hellams missed pretty much the entire season with a preseason injury as well. He was looking really good as a sort of box-focused safety before he got hurt last year. So they do have, I think, two really good depth safeties now. But yeah, you have to think Xavier Watts, who I thought was just an absolute steal in the third round. I mean, crazy. I'm sure we'll talk about the draft picks more, but yeah, you can kind of sense a theme here. They're kind of filling out the depth chart with reliable sort of, average starter types or specialist type guys. Like Floyd's more of a pass rush specialist, but he's good at that role. Morgan Fox is a pass rush specialist, not overly expensive, just good at his job. Divine Diablo is sort of a coverage focused linebacker they didn't have. Jordan Fuller gives you a veteran safety option if you don't get someone in the draft or if DeMarco Hellams isn't fully healthy or whatever. So they kind of came through and filled out the roster before the draft with these, not necessarily high-end free agents, but value adds that I think will provide plus value and give them a veteran sort of backstop to what will probably be a bunch of rookies and second-year players stepping into starting roles this year that we didn't see last year.
Well, there'll be some growing pains, but again, the depth is stronger. And a couple of those guys, I mean, Dorless, we didn't talk about as well. So Dorless and Trice, I mean, guys like this, they've got to take a step up. And nobody knows, right? I mean, who do you have a little bit more faith on, Dorless or Trice?
It's hard to say. I mean, they're going to be changing the scheme. It's going to be a typical Ulbrich, Dan Quinn, Robert Saleh sort of 4-3 under that, is basically a hybrid 3-4 that has typically 4 down linemen with like an overhang linebacker. So we'll see. I think Dorless is going to be a true two-way player who's going to play some interior and some at like big end and base package goal line type stuff. Zach Harrison is going to be primarily back on the edge as a big end. Because in this defense, you want a stand-up guy and a 5-tech sort of big end on the other side. So, the stand-up guys, obviously the 2 rookies are involved there. Leonard Floyd, Arnold Ebiketie. But at the big end spot, you got Zach Harrison, you got Dorless mixing in, and Braylon Trice is probably going to be involved in that group because despite Trice playing standing up most of the time in college, he's actually over 270 pounds. Like this is a big dude. So he might still stand up, but he'll probably play more of that big end role. So they'll kind of have two rotations. And then obviously, for short yardage, goal line, they'll probably put two big ends out there. And for pass rush downs, they'll probably put two stand-up guys out there. So now they actually, I think, have a very healthy rotation for both of those spots and a little bit more ability to match up with specific teams or fronts that they just didn't have last year because, again, they were really limited by the personnel that they had available. But yeah, on the interior, you mentioned Dorless. He'll play quite a bit there too.
Okay.
But I think Ruka Rororo is going to be one of the starters there. The second round pick that just didn't play a ton last year. So that got, at this point, it looks like Onyemata will be the other starter. We'll see if he ends up sticking around. They've asked LaCale London to bulk up. He's going to be their nose tackle run stuffer when they need one. But in this defense, they may or may not play with the nose tackle if it's not, necessary. So they've definitely built out the defensive line room to have a lot more players,
sure.
guys with more specialized roles. So I'm interested to see how they actually deploy it because I think they have a lot of options. But yeah, I think the idea is that, Rook and Dorless will actually play. I don't know if they'll play together all the time or they'll have some more rotation, but I would expect Rook to be like a 60 to 70% type of snap player if he's ready for it, because I think they believe in him that much.
So do you think Dorless then plays more than Trice because of the fact that the position just warrants that? Because really, if let's say they let Onyemata go, and we know Rook is going to play, if they do a standard 4-3, how is that going to work up front? Who do you think might line up next to Rook?
I think if Onyemata's here, it'll be Onyemata. If he's gone, they do have some options. If it's pass rush downs, probably Dorless is like, this is a name that older Falcons fans will remember. I don't know about other people, but the Falcons under Dan Quinn had a guy named Derek Shelby who basically is Brandon Dorless. He would play 5 tech on base downs, and then he would kick inside to play 3 or something else, as like a pass rusher in those pass rush sets. So that's probably going to be Dorless's role. Okay. But LaCale London, if they need a nose tackle, if they're going up against like a heavy run team, they'll have London play 1 tech and probably have Rook play, 3. And they also have Morgan Fox, obviously, that will probably rotate with Dorless, opposite Rook, or just take over for Rook if he needs a breather. So, they brought back Taquan Graham, who was a 5th round pick, who's played, reasonably as a rotational guy. The team has an obsession with Kentavious Street, who, if you just let him rush the passer, he's fine. But yeah, again, Street has a very similar build to Dorless as well. So again, they're kind of making these archetypes of we want this type here and this type here, but they very much like length, especially with their interior guys. Rook has crazy long arms. So did Zach Harrison. He's going back to the edge, but Taquan Graham had 35-inch arms. I think Dorless had 33 or 34-inch arms as well. So they really do prioritize length on the interior, and I think they're going for that. And then they seem to care a little bit less about that outside. So
what about linebackers? So do you think both Diablo and Anderson, do you think they both wind up starting with Ellis in the middle, or what are the kind of, again, 4-3 standard look under that base package? How do you see the linebackers lining up?
Yeah, this is the one I think is the biggest question mark, because I don't really see them taking Caden Ellis off the field. He's just such a valuable piece to their blitzing and other things. He just isn't the best coverage option. So my guess is it'll probably be either Diablo or Anderson next to Caden Ellis. And then if they're going with a third linebacker in like a base defense, my guess is that it would be Jalen Walker. That's playing sort of an overhang Sam
Makes
linebacker.
Sense. Yeah.
And they've really kind of downplayed that and said he's going to play edge, but I just don't believe it. Like, yeah. I don't believe you're going to have Jalen Walker just being a pass rush specialist as a rookie. Like, I think he's going to play some linebacker, but we'll see how much that ends up being. But yeah, I think he's sort of an overhang type of guy that's going to play a fair amount on the line of scrimmage, obviously. But and play as close to the line of scrimmage probably as possible. But I over time, I think they'll build out his role to play some off ball. But, I mean, obviously they're hoping he's Micah Parsons, right? He's a guy that is undersized, but doesn't seem to matter. And he's just a great pass rusher, and he can do some off ball stuff for you. But, basically what the Cowboys figured out with Micah Parsons was every time this guy isn't rushing the passer, we're kind of wasting his ability. So we really don't need him to play around, play off ball too much. But I expect that's what they want from Walker over time. And he'll play a lot of edge rusher. And then some off ball depending on matchup. And obviously they like him as a QB spy. That was kind of his special power, at college, is that he just could chase down the athletic quarterbacks. And they're going to have plenty of opportunities to test that out. Week 4 against Jaden Daniels, I would expect that to be an interesting one. So.
Well, John Cooper, our veteran scout, who wrote up a lot of the scouting reports in the guide, talked about that when we were going over Walker, about look for Walker even before the draft is more of a look of an off-ball guy earlier in his career. And then, like you said, he's got to start because they didn't draft him where they drafted him not to rush the passer. So he'll work into that. Okay. By the way, speaking of our lads, don't forget, this is coming out soon, the draft review guide. That's the reason I'm interviewing Kevin. I'm picking Kevin's brain because I have to write a team report for the Atlanta Falcons, and I'm getting all of my a lot of my information here from Kevin. So this is available at ourlads.com. You can check out the link in the description of the video. It should be out late June, and you can get a PDF version or a hard copy similar to the draft guide that came out, obviously, a few weeks before the NFL draft. Okay, so let's talk. You know what? Let's talk coaching then, since you mentioned Ulbrich. That's the big move. So, yeah, what have you seen so far? I chuckle because the big, of course, story that came out was a stupid story, which we don't need to get into. But let's talk about the on-field stuff that mattered the most. So, how is he developing once again in Atlanta? This time as the defensive coordinator?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of familiarity there. There's a lot of trust with Morris and Ulbrich, and hopefully that'll help them, in terms of communication. And I think Ulbrich is gonna, I think what Morris wanted with Jimmy Lake was that he would just take over and run the defense so that Morris could handle the head coaching responsibilities. And that didn't end up being the case. Morris had to take over the defense at some point. And then I think the last game of the season where the Falcons, obviously gave up 40 plus points to the Panthers, that was, if you look at that game closely, which I don't recommend watching either of the defenses in that game, just watch the quarterbacks duel it out, because that was fun. But that defense and that was basically Morris saying, okay, Lake, this is your chance. Like, show me that you can run this defense. I'm gonna hands off. This is speculation, but if you look at what was on the field, it didn't look like the defense any of the previous weeks. So this is like, okay, shoot your shot, Lake. Do what you want to do. Show me that you can run the defense your way, or we're probably going to have to move on. And Lake cooked up something. I don't recommend eating whatever he cooked. That looked like it would make you very sick. But they gave up 40 points to the Panthers, which was not a good offense. Right?
Yeah, it was one of those games where you were watching when you came back to it, watching some other games, you were like, what the hell's going on in this game that I missed?
Wild game. Thankfully, I was not covering that game live, because I'm sure there would have been some very angry tweets that I probably would have regretted later. But ultimately, we saw what happened there. There was one famous clip where you're looking at the end zone, all 22 view, and you can't see the right edge rusher. He's like not on the screen because he's in the slot, like lined up across from the receiver. And that kind of just sums it up.
Like
really.
way wide 9.
I think he was covering the slot receiver. I don't. Yeah. I know Lorenzo Carter is, probably the best coverage edge, but that's ridiculous. As you can see, that's it's not necessarily a title that you want. So that didn't work out. So they go with Ulbrich, who has a track record of success, and is just, a guy that I think Morris trusts to be able to handle the defense. Yeah, he'll be entirely and that's the thing about Ulbrich's scheme, which is, again, similar to Dan Quinn's scheme and Robert Saleh. It's all the same flavor of 4-3 under with a lot of quarters and cover 3 behind it. The nice thing about that scheme, it's a double-edged sword, but it's super simple, right? Pretty much every defender, every veteran has spent some time in that scheme because it's so popular in the NFL and in college. It's a very just go aggressive scheme, very simple, not a lot of complicated coverage rules or assignments. And that was part of the problem with Lake's scheme, is that guys just didn't there was a lot of conflicting. It was trying to be Vic Fangio's scheme, but they didn't have Vic Fangio to implement it, and it just wasn't getting taught correctly. Okay. It was just too much. And Ulbricht's scheme is not going to be like that. It's going to be much simpler. And again, it's easier for offenses to attack, and it relies obviously on you just having the personnel to be able to hold up. But, I think it's better than trying to make it too complicated and just not understanding what you're supposed to do and have tons of coverage.
Yeah, let them make the mistakes. That's the whole deal.
Yeah, so, and there's all, and I'm sure we'll get to the draft picks here soon, but there's a huge emphasis on creating turnovers. They drafted two players with the most interceptions in college football over the past 2 years. And then one of their UDFAs was the third player with the most interceptions. So, clearly an emphasis on, we're just going to take, this defense might not be good, but if we can just get a pick here or there and give it back to our offense, hopefully that will be enough. And I think that's a reasonable plan, right? But I do think Ulbricht is an established defensive coordinator. The scheme isn't anything overly sexy or crazy, but we've seen that it can work if you have players that can execute it. And it's a scheme that the players love because it's so simple. And it just lets you kind of go and do stuff. And it can be good for stats. It can get you sacks. It can get you picks. So it's definitely a departure from what last year's scheme was, but I think that's ultimately a very good thing. So,
okay, let's get into the draft, and let's start with those 2 picks. Now, again, Jalen Walker, kind of already talked about it, but the fact is that was not a surprising move at all. It was anticipated, and it happened. So I want to know more about the second pick, but I want you to talk about both of them, of course, and your feelings when you heard the move, and how surprising was it when you heard the trade? And when you did you necessarily know what it was for at the time? Even though edge rusher was already off the board, you might have thought checklist. Did you anticipate that they were doubling down on edge rushers?
So, yeah, my initial thought was not double dipping on edge. It was actually, I thought they were coming up for Malachi Starks, who they really, really liked. And they would have been sniping, obviously, the Ravens, who picked him just a pick or 2 ahead.
That would have been nice.
And I would have been happy with that. But given that they were able to get Watts,
yes.
I
worked out.
Okay, yeah. I think they probably made the right call here. Because it's one of those NFL maxims, right? Safeties fall. It just always happens. The Ravens benefited from it, and the Falcons benefited from it. I had Watts just like a tick below Starks. I think Starks has special athleticism. He just moves different. But Watts, in terms of on the field play, very similar player, very similar profile, and obviously even more production in terms of ball hawking. But yeah, I mean, obviously the pick of Jalen Walker was kind of chalky, given that, he fell, 5 spots, 5 to 6 to 7, 8 spots lower than most people thought he was going to go. I think everyone thought if he made it to Carolina, he was going there. I think people were surprised he fell past, San Francisco and those guys too. So, the Saints passed on him, which I actually get. And I think him going at 15 is probably for the best because, as much as Jalen Walker is a very exciting player, completely clean, off field, on field, everybody loves him. Everybody raves about him. He's a true leader. You love all of that evaluation. The on-field is a little bit trickier because he is one of those Micah Parsons type, Hassan Reddick type guys. That's there really aren't very many examples of this working, but when it does work, it can be really, really good. So I don't typically like to bet on extreme outliers like that, especially the top 10. But when you get to 15, it starts to make more sense.
I agree.
That's where you're willing to gamble on it. And, given, everything else about his profile gives you a lot more faith that he's going to be able to put in the work and get to where he needs to be a very successful player in the NFL. So I like that pick, and I think it gives the Falcons, a guy that could do two different things for them. Obviously, the higher leverage plays are going to come at edge, but he can play off ball. That's probably where he needs more work. Off ball linebacker, especially like if you're playing in the middle, which they probably won't ask him to do that. But it's really underrated in terms of just how difficult it is to play linebacker at the NFL level, that there's no time to react. And the guys that don't have the instincts for it just wash out of the league or play special teams, because everything's lightning speed at the NFL level. And if you can't read it quick enough, it doesn't really matter how athletic you are. And this was something that Troy Anderson struggled with early in his career, was that he's a one-of-one athlete at linebacker, and even he looked slow to get to the play because, the instincts weren't there. Hopefully that's been fixed. And I think Jalen Walker is someone that obviously he's like 21 years old. He's got plenty of time to learn the position, but I think them starting him at edge and sort of building out off-ball responsibilities to mix in over time as needed is the best way to go. And that's what they're going to do. So that's one thing about Ulbrich that I didn't mention too. Very forthcoming immediately. Like Lake never wanted to say anything about what they were doing, very tight-lipped. And again, it's like, well, I don't know what you were trying to hide. I don't think
maybe because he didn't know the answer.
Maybe that was the case too. I do like knowing that they have an answer and an idea, but they come out and say, "Yep, Jalen Walker's going to be an edge rusher to start," and we'll see what happens from there. James Pearce Jr. is much simpler, right? He's an edge rusher. He's a damn good one. Truly rare, like burst off the line. He's one of those guys that you could put on his film for anyone, and they like pretty much anyone that doesn't even have a scouting background, and they could tell you that guy's a first round pick, because that type of burst is something you see a handful of times in a class, maybe. And Pearce, to me, he's kind of a spicy prospect. Definitely his personality is not typical for that type of position, right? Kind of a understated, nonchalant style to him that I think really rubbed some coaches the wrong way. Infamously the story that he, forgot his speed suit, for the combine in his hotel room, which is why he ran the 40 in a hoodie. Still ran the fastest 40 of any edge rusher in the hoodie. But, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I just forgot it." It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Not that big of a moment.
Yeah. But, and it obviously didn't cause problems. So, if it doesn't cause problems, it's probably okay. But the Falcons did a lot of work sort of vetting him and trying to make sure that like this is the guy we want to take with the first round pick. But if Walker had been gone, they would have taken Pearce at 15. That was who they wanted. So that's part of why they traded up for him. It's because they really still wanted to get Pearce. They just couldn't say no to Jalen Walker. They were completely shocked to have him on the board at 15. And yeah, Pearce's projection is like, he's going to be an edge rusher for you. He's going to be a pass rush specialist. And I think he's an underrated run defender too. I mean, he's not like a point of attack, strong side, 5-tech, big end. Like you're going to go head up with an offensive tackle and think you're going to push the tackle back. He is definitely like he's a hold your own type of guy and a great pursuit player given that burst. But he worked really hard on his run defense this last year in college. That was, I think, more impressive than anything is that a lot of times you'll see these pass rush specialists, and Princely Umanmielon's a great example of this. They know they're great pass rushers and they're going to get drafted high, and they just kind of phone in the run defense, right? And in the NFL, you can't really do that. You have to be able to be a passable run defender, or you're going to limit yourself to just third downs only, and that's not really a pathway to becoming a super productive pass rusher, because depending on how good your defense is, you might not get a lot of those opportunities. So I think Pearce, his guys that don't care or guys that don't love the game or that are phoning it in, they don't work on their run defense. They don't bother with it. They just try to pad those pass rush stats and go home. And Pearce worked really hard. You could tell the technique was better. He tried to bulk up and get stronger. To me, that was what tilted me from the, there seem to be two people that are out on James Pearce because they think he's weird and they, they don't like the build and all this stuff, or people that see the sort of the trump cards that he possesses and see the track of he's actually putting in the effort to improve parts of his games that these problematic quote unquote players typically ignore.
Sure.
And that made me feel a lot more comfortable watching, that improvement. So I think the combination of those two guys is really interesting. Obviously, they're both kind of undersized edge rushers. Pearce is much less undersized. I mean, he's more of a typical build. I know, he's probably going to play at 250, but that's kind of more of just the norm these days. I know a lot of people think that edge rushers have to be 265, 270 now, but yeah, it's just not the case anymore. So he'll be probably a guy that I wouldn't be shocked, honestly, if Pearce is playing like more snaps overall than Walker, just because he's just a standard edge rusher. Walker's probably going to see, his edge rush snaps more limited to pass rush downs. But then if he's playing some Sam overhang, he might make up the difference there. But
sure.
Really interesting to see, those two guys come in at the same time and kind of like, oh, how are they going to get both these guys involved? Well, it's a good problem to have too many edge rushers after, 7 years of, well,
Absolutely.
We've got one guy we like, and,
yes.
the rest is we're praying a lot. Yeah.
And a veteran that you signed.
Yep.
And
exactly.
And as we started the show off with. And the thing that I like is that even though I'm not sure how it'll look this year, you get the feeling that it's like one of those things where the coaching, and we talked about the coaching, this is where coaching matters because there's talent now. There's a lot more talent now on this defense, and they've had young talent in a while. It's now up to the coaches to get them to maximize that talent. And if they can't, they're out. But hopefully the Falcons have hired the right people to get it done.
Yes, that was another big step as they fired Jay Rodgers, who was their defensive line coach after just the 1 year he left with Jimmy Lake. They retained pretty much everybody else. And I was never really sure why they hired him in the first place. He was previously the Chargers D-line coach. And while that Chargers line did have some decent pass rush metrics, they were consistently the worst run defense in the NFL year after year. And that's exactly what happened to Atlanta. Every single defender on the defensive line got worse at defending the run under Jay Rodgers. So I'm pretty glad
anybody can coach Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack.
Well, yeah, I mean, that helps, certainly.
Yeah.
But they brought in Nate Ollie from the Texans, who has a long track record of being on some really good defensive lines.
Okay.
And obviously, the Houston Texans defensive line is top notch. And he seems to be a guy that they're very excited to have gotten. And, he gets a promotion to full-time defensive line coach. He was an assistant with a lot of really good teams. And now he gets his shot. And I think that will be a big upgrade over what they had there. So again, it plays into hopefully, the simplicity of the scheme, a better defensive line coach, and better talent, hopefully all come together to produce some better actual on-field results than we've seen in a few years now.
So they double down on the draft and edge rushers. Then they double down on safeties. We talked about Xavier Watts to get him in round 3. Very, very fortunate. And then to get Billy Bowman Jr. after that in round 4, also a very nice pick. I mean, there's a lot to like about Bowman. There are a lot of warts with Bowman, but again, that's why he's a 4th-round draft pick. So you get him to obviously concentrate more on taking advantage of what he does well. And those are a couple of nice pickups in the middle rounds.
Yeah. Now, Xavier Watts was one of my favorite players. I must have drafted him to Atlanta in the 2nd round like 4 or 5 times just because that value and he just typically fell into the 40s, even though I had him as like a top 40 player. And I think there was a lot of hype around Nick Emanwari, and he's very intriguing.
That's a different player. Yeah.
He's nowhere near the safety at this time that Xavier Watts is. Like, it's a very different style of safety.
Yes,
also,
very different.
Emanwari's got a long way to go. And he's obviously got incredible traits. 10 RAS player there. But I was always a bigger fan of Watts because it's like, look, athleticism at safety, especially the 40, probably the most overrated thing and one of the most overrated things in the NFL. And you look at a guy, so all these great safeties, they run in the 4.5s. They have good testing, but you're looking for they don't need more than good testing because the best safeties have great instincts. And
absolutely.
And if you don't have that, you can't play safety. And I certainly, I'm pulling for him and Warrior. I think he's a really fun prospect, but Watts has those instincts. He's ready to go. He's got some of the best ball hawking instincts of any safety that you'll see coming out of college. If he had Malachi Starks' athleticism, he would have been in that conversation with Starks as a first round pick, and probably would have gone, late in the first round, because safeties are just perennially undervalued. Kyle Hamilton's the perfect example of that, right? Falls into the teens when he was probably a top 5 player in that draft.
100%. Yep.
But Watts is great. The only thing is he's not huge, right? He's just a average run defender, but I'm not paying my safety to be a great run defender, right? The safeties that get paid, are the guys that are taking the ball away and making impact plays on the back end. And that's Watts' game. And that duo with him and Bates has so much potential to be so dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
And Bates is a guy that can really do anything for you. Like if they like Watts more as the deep safety because of his size limitations, you could have Bates play closer to the line of scrimmage. And that's terrifying in other ways. And that Bates in that robber area of the field is really dangerous as well. But typically teams don't have a better deep safety option, or even a comparable one. So Bates has to play deep, but Bates is a great tackler. He's really good at navigating traffic in the run game, and he can take the ball away in the short area too. So I'm really curious to see how they deploy those two. They'll probably make them interchangeable. They'll probably do a lot of rotating. But you really just love to see that combo because now they've got, two of the best ball hawks in the NFL at safety. And then you get to Billy Bowman, who's going to play slot corner for Atlanta. And that to me, they came out like immediately after the pick and we were still talking about the pick and they'd already had Jeff Ulbrich on the stand saying like, oh yeah, he's going to be our slot corner. It's like that level of clarity is great. First of all. And second, it's like, wow, what was the biggest issue with Billy Bowman is that not the most reliable tackler. He tackles like a bat out of hell. So that's not the problem. But he's not the biggest or the most reliable tackler. And he was often tasked with being the free safety last line of defense. And you don't necessarily want the kamikaze guy as your free safety, right? Like that's maybe a little bit risky, but you put him at slot corner and now he's the first guy that's going to try to get there. And you can afford to have the first guy be the kamikaze guy because you want basically if Billy Bowman can just get hands on somebody or slow them down at the line of scrimmage, that's all you need. He doesn't have to finish the tackle. You're not necessarily needing your slot corner to make, 200 tackles. You just need your slot corner to affect the play and keep somebody from sprinting out of there without being touched and getting to the second level. I think this role is absolutely, like, I didn't even think of this when evaluating him. I know he's played slot in his career, but you mitigate his biggest weakness, which is unreliable tackling. You mitigate his size problems on the back end by just putting him in the slot and letting him play a little bit closer and not having that, last line of defense responsibility on his plate. I think he can be really good slot corner. He moves like a corner, that was, and he's actually built more like a corner than a safety in some ways. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out. They're obviously not necessarily banking on him starting right away. They did bring back D. Alford, who had a disappointing 2024, but pretty much everyone in the defense did. I think people are kind of getting a little bit too much on Alford for what was probably a systemic overall problem where everyone underperformed. So I still feel okay with Alford starting the year. And then they got a guy in Natrone Brooks too, who was a UDFA from a couple years ago, who had to step in at a couple times when Alford had to miss time and actually looked pretty good as well. So they have, I think, 3 really interesting slot options. The scheme change will just help in general, but I think Bowman's got tremendous potential there. And again, now you've got 3 great ball hawks on the field for you, 2 safeties and your slot corner in a very zone heavy defense. It's going to give these guys a lot of opportunities to just sit down and make a play. I think that's a cohesive strategy.
Oh yeah.
That really could pay off on a defense that look, we're probably not going to have the best pass rush, but we think we can create pressure. We added a bunch of guys that are great at creating pressure. We have 2 really good outside corners. AJ Terrell is obviously a top outside corner. And then Mike Hughes was way better than I think people expected playing outside, which, the Chiefs played him outside back in, I think it was 2018, 2017. And he looked really good. He graded out in the 70s, according to PFF, which PFF's coverage metrics, not necessarily the best, but looked great out there. Then teams they keep trying to put him in the slot. Get this man out of the slot. Like, just stop it. Like,
those days are
he's not
over.
good. He just doesn't handle the two-way go well. But you put him outside, he's a great run defender. He's just a good number 2 corner. And they got him for $6 million a year for 3 years. That's a bargain for an actual starting number 2 corner. So you got 2 stalwarts on the outside. You got 1 all-pro safety, 1 very, very interesting rookie safety who you feel really great about, especially playing next to Bates, so you don't have to put too much on his plate.
Oh, they're set now.
And then you've got, a competition in the slot with a couple of really intriguing guys in terms of a veteran like D'Alford, who in the past has been a, average to above average slot corner who can kind of be your backstop if Bowman takes time. Or you've got Billy Bowman Jr. as a rookie who really could be a really pleasant surprise there if he's able to win that job. But I also like that they're not just depending on a 4th round pick to start in the slot, which we know is a critical spot in today's NFL, that they do have a guy like Alford there to actually give pretty good competition, along with Natrone Brooks, who I think is probably someone who's underrated in that slot battle. But you just really like that
Fuller. Give Watts time if he needs it.
Oh yeah. I mean, guys like, they have Clark Phillips, who they've toyed with putting in the slot. He's another guy that, look, he's undersized, but he just plays better outside. So I hope he stays out there. They've got Kevin King back, who they like as like a versatile corner safety, like just emergency depth guy who can play either spot. The secondary looks really strong for Atlanta. And I think it's kind of gone under the radar on this team that they just all of a sudden now have this starting 5 in the secondary that could just has so many ball hawks. They've got, really good coverage safeties. They've got 2 really good run defense safeties. They could go a lot of different ways with this group, and that doesn't even bring into the conversation Kobe Bryant, who they somehow got as a UDFA. This was a guy that I thought was going to be a 4th round pick.
I don't understand it. I know he probably didn't run particularly well and such, but I don't understand it. Either one of the kids from Kansas, I don't understand how either of them lasted until after the draft. So where do the Falcons envision Bryant? And also Verdon's an interesting pickup. He had a nice career over at Iowa State. So those are the most intriguing UDFAs that I think Atlanta signed.
Yeah, I mean, I expect Bryant to compete for an outside corner spot right away. He's not going to beat out Mike Hughes or AJ Terrell.
Sure,
that seems unlikely. But
the
spots behind them are pretty wide open. I mean, Clark Phillips obviously is someone the team really likes, so he's going to get one of those jobs, but he just has to beat out Mike Ford Jr., who he's a special teamer, right? I mean, he's a great special teamer, don't get me wrong, but he's not really someone you want playing on defense.
No.
And, I think all he has to do is basically beat out Mike Ford for the roster. And, I think the Falcons obviously would like to keep Mike Ford for special teams, but they're not going to. Are you really going to cut Kobe Bryant to keep a special teams corner? I just don't think so. So
I hope not.
If Bryant is looking good, I think he's got the final roster spot, and they'll probably slow play that a little bit. He'll be someone who's they're developing, but the idea is probably we'll keep Bryant around. We'll have him on the roster. He can be one of our outside corner depth pieces. And the idea is, in a couple of years, maybe next season, even, if he's ready to go, maybe he starts over Mike Hughes, or maybe he's just your 3rd outside corner that, because you're going to need backup corners, right? It's probably the position that has the most injuries in the NFL. So having him as a high-end depth corner for you could be excellent as well. So, I think that whole group is really good. And then Malik Verdon, they're actually converting to linebacker.
Okay.
So, which I guess makes sense. I mean, he is huge, right? He's that giant build of a safety. I know, my buddy Thor Nystrom has his comp as Hamza Nasruddin from FSU a couple of years back, another huge safety. Nasruddin ended up going, I think, on day 2, and it didn't end up working out for him. But I think Verdon, playing linebacker makes a ton of sense. He's 6'4", 220. I mean, he's basically linebacker size, right? So, put 10 pounds on him, and he's a coverage linebacker for you. So I think they like that option to just give them more depth at linebacker. We'll see if he's able to turn that into a roster spot right away, or if he's more of a stash on the practice squad and continue to develop type of guy. But they definitely really like Verdon. And then the team, I think the team understands that Kobe Bryant is someone they're not going to be able to stash. So Bryant, I hope he plays really well in camp and earns that spot, because he's not going to last on the practice squad. Just too many teams are. I think teams were. What I heard from my buddy Thor, who is a big Kansas guy, it's his alma mater. He has deep connections there. Apparently, Bryant did not interview well, and turned a lot of teams off.
Something happened. Yeah,
but the Falcons coached him at the Shrine Bowl. Marquise Williams, the special teams coordinator, was his coach at the Shrine Bowl. And I think that was obviously critical to him ending up in Atlanta, probably that relationship they built there. And the Falcons obviously seemed to be like, well, we're fine with you. I mean, come on down. I mean, but he was a super coveted UDFA. So
another playmaker, by the way.
Yes, he was behind, Watts and Bowman. I think he was third in terms of interceptions over the last 2 years. So
couple pick sixes.
Yep.
I know what's his name? Dotson had 4, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible. Both those guys lasted as long as they did. But that's Atlanta's. By the way, did Bryant get the most out of all these free agents? Did Atlanta give any big deals to any of these UDFAs?
I don't remember what Bryant got. I expect they had to give him something.
Yeah.
I know they ended up giving UDFA wide receiver Quincy Skinner like $150K. As a signing bonus.
Average. Yeah.
Yeah. That was one. I don't know how much they gave Nick Nash, who is probably their other biggest UDFA ad, the wide receiver from the Triple Crown winner.
Yeah, we got to get to that. Yeah. We got to get to that.
It was almost entirely on defense. So this is why the show is,
it is
dominated by.
We haven't gotten to the offensive guy yet.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And how about Barrow too? Because I know Barrow's the guy that, I like Barrow too.
Yeah, he's another one of those guys I think that they will have in that big end mold. That's he's probably similar to like Brandon Dorlus and, Contavious Street, those guys that they'll have playing pass rush snaps on pass rushing downs and outside on early downs. So, I think he's another guy in that pipeline. And, we'll see. He definitely a good college player, just kind of undersized for a traditional like 3-tech role in the NFL. But, this is a typical archetype for a Dan Quinn defense. They like that 285, 290 type of, defensive end, defensive tackle hybrid. They don't mind playing 2-3 techs, on 3rd and long, right? That they're totally fine with that. So, that's kind of what his role will be, and we'll see if he can, outperform. Like he probably has to beat out like Contavious Street, or obviously if David Onyemata ends up getting cut, that will make his path to the roster easier. But yeah, I'm curious to see what he could do, because he's someone that I think that also had a draftable grade on a lot of boards.
Yeah, it was kind of there at the end, but still, he had. I like what I saw out of him at Miami, and would not have been surprised if he would have been drafted. Okay, so let's go to the first offensive guy we're going to talk about here as far as the draft, and then kind of move that into, as you said, a few of these guys offensively that really, I mean, I'll be honest, I think Atlanta had more UDFA talent that I liked than any other team. We just talked about 3 of them on defense. You mentioned Skinner, but you mentioned Nick Nash, and you can say all you want about his 40 and all that kind of stuff, but the kid's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he's going to be a pro. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And then you got Joshua Gray, who had a very long, good career in college, playing a lot of meaningful games. And one of my sleeper tight ends, Joshua Simon. I really like Joshua Simon. I knew there was a chance he wouldn't get drafted, but I really like what I saw on film on Simon. So let's start first of all with their draft pick. They finally used up a draft pick on offense and went with Jack Nelson, who had a very good career at Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first of all, he chose number 69, so he's going to be a Hall of Famer. I think that's pretty much guaranteed now. But I don't want to see these offensive linemen taking numbers in the 50s. If you're a center, I'll allow it, okay. But if you're a tackle, you need 60s or 70s, all right.
Okay.
But yeah, 69, great number choice, so that sets him up well. But yeah, Jack Nelson, rock solid college tackle. I know not someone I watched a ton of before he got sent to Atlanta. I watched, some cut ups recently, but looks like a good base to build off of. Obviously, the size stands out, right? 6'7", like 320, big. The Falcons have definitely gone after that archetype over the last couple of years. Most of the guys they added, Storm Norton's their big tackle. He's their swing tackle and probably will continue to be that as long as he wants to. But they also added guys like Brandon Parker, Tyrone Wheatley. These guys are huge tackles, and Caleb McGarry himself also, 6'7". So they really seem to be looking for the size at tackle. But look, he's a guy. I think he's got the traits. I think he's got the pass protection skill and the run defense skill, the maneuverability and experience in zone, which is what the Falcons are going to run most of the time. With him, it's just about sort of the finer details and can he move around well enough? Can he, he's kind of a lumberer. I know some people have said, and he's kind of, he needs to get a little bit more bendy and get better at, point of attack stuff and balancing and all that. And those are like fine points of offensive line play that I'll leave up to the O-line experts to get into detail on. But, if you watch it, you could just see the little things that he does, probably need to work on. But this is a guy
that was a 7th round pick.
Yeah. And, I think in terms of a 7th round pick, this is a guy that probably is a passable, swing tackle, even as a rookie, so I think his chances of making the roster are good. He doesn't need to be, thankfully, because the Falcons do have Storm Norton, who's, he's had to start several games every year the last couple of years, and has been on par with McGarry for the most part. So, you feel great about that. But Jack Nelson, long-term swing tackle prospect, and obviously you're hoping for, that low percentage chance that he can develop into a starter for you long-term. But you like the pick. I was expecting them that they haven't re-signed McGarry yet. And so that makes him a free agent next year. Okay. I still am not convinced they're going to move on from McGarry. I think they want to see now with the added importance that he has, given that he's the blind side. How does Penix hold up long-term with McGarry there? And they want to see that before they give him a big extension. And, we'll see. But in the 3 games they played, it was fine. It wasn't really a big deal. So we'll see how that goes. But Nick Nash, that's my guy, like right away. Like this is the guy that I'm going to pull for and plant my flag on, because he's just, you don't just luck your way into Triple Crown, right? You don't get, sure, you can get the receptions. The yardage, was insane. And the 16 touchdowns. It's just at the Division I level, you don't just luck your way into that. It just doesn't happen. So there's definitely something there with Nash, and he's a 2-year starter at receiver too. Like this is the fact that he's been able to pick up the route running, the nuance, just these things that you'll see guys that are 7-8 year players still struggling with. Clearly a super bright guy, former quarterback. So he understands, and I'm sure that helped him, is that he understands not just the route, but what the quarterback needs to see to throw him the ball, like where he needs to be, what he needs to be doing. This is part of the thing with these quarterback converts is they know the reason behind it on a deep level before they actually go do it. So that can help with the transition. But yeah, is he the fastest guy, the most explosive guy? No, that's why he's probably going to be an NFL wide receiver 3 would be my guess. He's a guy that it's going to be a big slot for you.
Sure.
That's his thing, is that he just can't get off press. Like that's the one thing he hasn't really mastered. But if he learns how to get off press, he could be very, very dangerous. But as it stands, like in the slot with a free release, he's just too much to handle for a lot of slot corners. He's just too big. He has fantastic hands and really good contact balance to survive the first hit. Not overly creative, like after the catch, or he's not going to run away from anyone, but he is a possession receiver, chain mover. Obviously on deep routes, he's got the catch radius. He can go up, over the rim and get the ball. But, this is a classic guy that's like, you look at Juwan Jennings with the 49ers. Like Nick Nash can do that role. Juwan Jennings just got paid. He got 2 years, $20 million with the 49ers. So, I don't see, Jennings obviously had a lot more experience as a receiver, but it also took him a while to get to where he is today too.
That's true.
But I could see a similar role where he's your big slot, he's your physical receiver, big red zone threat. But that's kind of the one thing.
That'll be a specialty, I think.
Yeah. And like Atlanta, I think what Atlanta really wants to do, and this is if you look more broadly at the receivers they brought in, they're all big receivers, right? Jamal Agnew was the one guy that they brought in that was like under 6'1", 6'2", and he's going to be your return specialist. But I think what happened was like Ray McLeod, he was available, and I think they all liked him. And obviously he outperformed expectations, right? He showed that he is an average to above average NFL slot receiver, who was basically known as nothing more than a special teamer. So McLeod, shout out. He's shown that he can do that, but I don't think that was their long-term vision, because McLeod's thing is he can't really play outside the slot. He just doesn't have the size, doesn't have the toolkit for it. But I think what the Falcons want to do is what the Rams do, which is they want their receivers to be interchangeable for the most part. We know Darnell Mooney can play the slot and has before, although he's very good, obviously, as the Z field stretcher, and was almost hit 1,000 yards last year. If he had played that last game, he ended up finishing with, I think, 993. So he was 3 off of the Falcons having their first 1,000-yard wide receiver duo since Julio Jones and Roddy White in 2012. I give it to him. Okay, I give it to him. It's 7 yards. He got it. But I think they would love to have Nick Nash or another big receiver win that slot job, because now you can rotate that guy and Drake London pretty much whenever you want, because Drake is obviously great as a big slot, but previously they just didn't have someone else that could win outside, so they needed Drake to play outside. But I think you get Nick Nash in there, you train him up and teach him how to beat press. That might take a little while, but you teach him how to beat press. And then you can do a lot of creative stuff there. And obviously Nick Nash, he gives a lot of effort as a blocker. He needs to improve the mechanics of it, but he's got the size and the strength that you believe eventually he can be a plus for you as a receiver in the blocking game. And that's kind of Ray's biggest issue, is he can kind of get in the way. And that's kind of all. You're talking about like a 5'10", 180-pound slot receiver. It's there's only so much you can do unless you're really one of those rare feisty guys. But any
chance that they sign a receiver in free agency with anybody that's left that's intriguing, or do you think that they're satisfied with what they have here?
I think they're perfectly comfortable with the starting three. I think they're fine. Like long term, I think they want this bigger slot presence.
Okay,
but I think they're content to let Ray play it out this year, and then they're going to kind of evaluate, whether that's Nick Nash or they really do like Kaderil Hodge. It wouldn't shock me if Hodge ends up starting. They kind of toyed with it a little at the end of the year. He obviously had the game-winning play in overtime against the Bucs. That was, fantastic. He's got more size to him, and he's also a specialty. They did give Kaderil Hodge a single-digit number, which, a lot of people, I don't think that's being talked about enough. The number you give him a single-digit number, that means he's a starter, right? So we'll see. But Chris Blair was someone they had as sort of a practice squad elevation last year, 6'2". They added David Sills, 6'3". Mekhi Polk, I believe, is 6'2", 6'3" as well. Jesse Matthews is 6'1", Quincy Skinner 6'2". Like they just brought Dylan Drummond, I think, is 6'3". Like they've just brought in a bunch of big receivers.
Okay.
The guy they took last year in the 6th round, Casey Washington, he's 6'2" as well. So they're gonna find one of these guys is gonna work. Like it's gonna be our big slot, be our big guy out there. And I think they just like those guys better because of the interchangeability and the fact that they're just going to be better special teamers too, right, with the size. So I'm curious to see who wins the job. I obviously have a ton of faith in Nick Nash. I think there's really something there. But, they really like Quincy Skinner. They gave him a big guarantee, big for, UDFA, sure. Big. But I'm curious to see who ends up winning that battle as the wide receiver 6 camp battle. Is always like one of the most intriguing, even though it's probably one of the least consequential. But that's going to be one to watch for sure.
Well, when you sign that many UDFAs, you don't usually have a lot of money to give like one guy. So you have to spread it around. And apparently they've done that. And I think they've done a very good job. So that's going to be very intriguing to keep an eye on rookie minicamp for sure. They already have the rookie side. Have you heard anything from the rookie side? And OTA should be right around the corner, right?
Yeah, Nick Nash was the standout at rookie minicamp, whatever that means, right? But he was
could be worse
among that group. Yeah, so that didn't surprise me at all. But okay. Yeah, And I know they're having Joshua Gray play center. So that is one that's interesting to watch because, behind Newsel, Javon Gwynn isn't really proven at all at center.
Yeah.
They did just sign Michael Gonzalez to also play center, I guess. So it seems like they're going to bring in some guys to compete for those depth center spots.
Okay.
They want one on the practice squad, I imagine, and then one behind Newsel. But I think, that backup center spot is pretty much wide open. So a guy like Joshua Gray or Michael Gonzalez absolutely could, win that and compete for it. So,
Okay. So before I let you go, what is your overall assessment with the Falcons offseason? From the coaching moves to the free agency signings and to the draft picks. I don't know if you want to give a grade or just basically how did you feel about their offseason in general?
Yeah, I think the Ulbrich hire I had just as like a good hire, but not one that like really enthused me. But again, it's sort of a reliable hire that makes a lot of sense. So you can't really hate on it. The free agency period was disappointing, but again, you have to take it in the context of they're paying Kirk Cousins this year. And the idea is that they're going to pay him this year and probably get off that deal for for big savings next year. If they can trade him, then they're going to have tons of savings next year. But that's just the consequence of taking two shots at quarterback is that, he's going to have to be paid. So that's this year. They had limited cap space. I think they did go out and get some guys, we'll see. I think the free agency was the weakest part of what they did, but they didn't have a lot of resources. So I think they took a lot of value bets, and we'll see if they can hit on one of those guys. Like if Floyd has a good season or Divine Diablo ends up starting or, what have you. I think they'll probably be looked at pretty favorably. But it's all kind of wait and see there. And the draft, is very spicy. Obviously you make the ultra aggressive move for James Pearce, trading back and giving up your 2026 first rounder. And that's kind of where this whole thing hinges now on 2025, where there's no option to tank. There's no option to trade pieces. There's no option to
that, by the way.
I think it makes sense. I mean, Falcons fans are tired of losing, right? So up the stakes. Why not? Like
put the pressure on.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we've had 7 straight seasons with no playoffs. So
yeah, right.
Sooner or later, you got to take some drastic action.
Sure.
And so I think it makes a ton of sense what they're doing. And I also think it makes a ton of sense for their timeline, which is I think they want to be a Super Bowl contender in 2026. Not 2025. Now, They would be happy to be a Super Bowl contender this year, but I don't think that's really the expectation. The expectation this year is make the playoffs, hopefully get a couple playoff games of experience under your belt, and then go into 2026 knowing what you have in Michael Penix and the offense and what you need to fix, change, whatever, and then having your 2 rookie pass rushers who we know historically are not likely to be huge sack players, maybe 4 to 5 sacks apiece. They will then be in their second year in 2026, where traditionally you can see a big jump in production. So you're sort of hoping that these guys develop and are these impact players for you in that season. And I think it all makes sense along those lines. They'll also have a lot more money to spend next year, which will help them kind of they'll kind of use this year to kind of figure out where the holes are and then hopefully patch them next season. But yeah, I mean, I think I give the whole thing a B, and it's mostly a B because I think if you go to an A, you're kind of baking in the assumption that everything worked.
Yeah, you hit on it.
I think you have to keep it at a B until you know the outcome of this season. Because if they make the playoffs and the pick that they give the Rams is in the 20s, they obviously won the trade and this was a genius move. If they fall short of that and give the Rams a pick in the teens or God forbid the top 10, then this whole thing falls apart and everyone's fired and, it's probably, yeah. So I give it a B because I think it's likely to work. I don't know that it'll be a slam dunk or it'll be apparent that it's a slam dunk right away, but I think they put themselves in the driver's seat to now compete for this division or at least a playoff spot in the NFC, which let's be honest, like the 7th seed in the NFC is not ultra competitive. This is not the AFC. So even if you can't get past the Bucs, like say that they just strike gold again on a 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years, color me skeptical of that. But You could still get in with probably 10 wins, right? And I think that's kind of what you have to be hoping for, even though, we'd obviously take 9 wins. That's better than they've done in the past 7 years. But I think the goal is 10 wins and a division title. But if you fall a little bit short and just make the wild card, you're not going to hear too many complaints.
Is there last one? Is there a spot on the roster that you think that they're concerned with, either a starter or if a starter were to go down?
I think center is the most tenuous. They just don't really have anything behind Newsel. And Newsel, he did start 8 games last year and was an average starting center. The run blocking was not as good, but I get the idea behind it, right? It's like, are we really going to pay, $15 million a year for Drew Dahlman to just upgrade our run blocking when we're probably moving to a more pass-heavy offense anyway? Let's see what we got in Newsel, and then if we have to draft a center high next year, then we will. That's kind of their plan. But I could see them signing a veteran center if Newsel isn't performing up to date, or if one of these like backup options isn't like compelling enough. But I think they do really like Ryan Newsel, and he's a guy, that is pretty interesting. So other than that, though, like, maybe like if they trade Cousins, they're probably looking for another backup quarterback, but that probably won't happen for a while. So that's not too terribly interesting. And
what's your guess? Do you think Cousins will be on the team this season, or that somehow, some way he won't?
I believe he'll be traded before week 1, but it might be pretty close to week 1. I think that the Falcons are just waiting on one injury, basically, because the market is barren, right? Like the Saints lost Derek Carr, and it's like, well, Tyler Shuck's starting. That tells you how barren the market is. There's not. They know the Falcons won't trade them Cousins.
Tyler Shuck,
not an option.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. They know not to even bother calling the Falcons about Cousins because they won't do it.
No.
And the Steelers are held hostage by Aaron Rodgers, which I feel sorry for Steelers fans, because I would never get into bed with Aaron Rodgers, figuratively or otherwise, and they're going to be on that crazy train probably up until the end of training camp. But I mean, the Steelers may come calling for Cousins at some point, right? I mean, they may have to if Aaron Rodgers keeps stringing them out, but once Aaron Rodgers makes his decision, the Falcons will either be trading Cousins immediately because Aaron Rodgers retired, or the first injury that occurs, someone's calling for Cousins. Because after Cousins, then there's truly nothing. So, I think it's
and that's why they got Stick too. They basically want Stick here to be the backup.
Stick is fine, right? He's not inspiring, but he's a passable backup quarterback. Because they couldn't just stick with Emory Jones, who is much more of like a QB3 developmental type.
No.
But yeah, if they trade Cousins, they'll add another backup quarterback. But I think they're okay with Easton Stick, and he's okay. But yeah, the nice thing is if you don't trade Cousins, then you've got the most like secure quarterback room in the NFL, where like it's that weird feeling where it's like, well, if Michael Penix gets hurt, it's like, well, we've got another starting quarterback, so it's not a crisis.
Then. Yeah,
but I would rather get something for Cousins and save the money and just roll the dice like every other team in the NFL is, every year. But hey, in the meantime, it's like, as much as we're talking about a quarterback injury, and obviously knock on wood and all that, like the quarterback injury could happen to anyone. It could even happen to you. So if he's already here, that eliminates a lot of problems, right? So, we'll see. But I do think by week 1 that we'll have a Cousins trade taken care of. So.
Okay. So that'll be taken care of. All right. So that was informative. I really appreciate your time as always, Kevin. And 5 days a week coverage?
Well, no. We don't. Not this time of year yet. No, during the season, we'll probably have 4 to 5 shows depending. But yeah, this time of year, we go down to 2 or 3. But there's always a Wednesday live show, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube.
Every Wednesday?
Yep. It's the Falcoholic on YouTube. And then we usually have a Friday show and a Monday show or a Tuesday show, depending on what's going on. But as it gets to June, we'll probably go down to 2 a week, until there's actually things to talk about again. But we'll be ramping up right around training camp, and then we'll be back to our regular season schedule at that point. So.
All right. And of course, we'll be drafting in our Dynasty rookie draft sometime soon.
the champion,
you are the champion.
They thought they could tear my team down and restart the league. And then I'm just like Thanos. I'm just inevitable. You just can't keep me down.
See?
No, that was extremely lucky, to be honest. That was incredibly lucky. But that's fantasy football, right? So
hey, that's right. You never know. And that's the fun of it. So, and it was only year 2. So got the win out of the way. Probably never going to win it again. Yeah, right. We had to get a one for our team. So
exactly.
Couldn't have them winning every year after they won the first year. So So I'm looking forward to it as well. Should be a lot of fun. All right, so we're out of here. Again, don't forget to check the description area. That's where we have links where you can check on all of where to find Kevin, the podcasts, the articles, and so forth. Covering the Atlanta Falcons. You could also check out ourlads.com for the draft review guide. And don't forget to subscribe here to the channel, both at Ourlads and here over on ProLine TV, because we're going to keep this up. We're going to be talking about the Vikings this week, the Houston Texans this week. And who else are we talking about? We're also talking about the Kansas City Chiefs this week, actually coming up tomorrow. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to keep doing this as long as we have a team to talk about. So for Kevin Knight, from the Falcoholic, appreciate your time and everybody out there that's been with us. And don't forget, if you missed our live show, obviously, which many of you have, you can check out these shows on demand. And this is pretty relevant all off season because not a lot's going to happen in the NFL for the next couple of months. So for Kevin Knight and Craig DePalma, thanks for tuning in here on the